Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm William Roberts, the Senior Vice President for Rights and Justice here at the Center for American Progress, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here today. Before I begin, I want to certainly extend CAP's thanks to our partners at Race Forward for this really important and timely discussion and for all the work and leadership that y'all are shouldering in the field, so thank you so much. We're coming together today to take a look back at the Eco Diversity Initiative, first established in 1992 in response to the critical need to increase the presence of people of color in the environmental field and in the movement broadly. Eco is responsible for opening countless doors and as a leading environmental careers development effort, the Eco Diversity Initiative played a pioneering role, really, in diversifying the environmental workforce, both within and outside the federal government, to the tune of literally thousands of people who came through as students, recent graduates, and professionals, some of whom the faces are being displayed behind me, and really provided an important pathway into environmental careers that shaped those thousands of lives and experiences of their associates. It really has continued to leave an indelible mark, as I said, across government, private sector, nonprofit sector, and serves as a really impressive model of both the operational success of racial equity work, impressive model of both the operational success, but also the intentional programmatic success inside the federal government. And so it's worth reflecting upon, but also worth replicating today, which is what we're going to talk about a little bit, because we know indeed what's happening outside these doors in the conversation around diversity, equity, and inclusion. We know that there is right now a concerted effort to turn back the clock on DEI initiatives, and we've seen efforts underway at the state level in particular states, and really supercharged, I think, last year after the Supreme Court's decision in their affirmative action case, which has been overinterpreted, misinterpreted by many to serve and suit a particular purpose. That's resulted in all kinds of attacks that we've seen in the media. Some of the high-profile ones we know about with the case going on against the Fearless Fund. We saw the news come out over the last couple of days about the Minority Business Development Agency, but also in everyday, smaller ways as well. And so, we can't let those be the final word on racial equity and inclusion in this country. We need to talk about the rest of the story, talk about the work that's being done by folks in this room and represented by this great network of folks in the ECHO and the ECHO cadre. And so that's why CAP and our partners have really been focused over the last couple of years engaging with the Biden-Harris administration as they've taken real concrete steps to promote equity and opportunity and to make the American dream accessible to all. We've seen that through groundbreaking executive actions on equity, as well as the president's ambitious economic agenda and other major legislative initiatives. And so it's imperative, that we continue to work toward and see these new and continued cross-sectoral investments and collaboration that we're going to talk about. The work that is done to engage with philanthropy and industry, so important as we look at the expansion and protection of diversity and equity initiatives to ensure, again, that everybody has the opportunity to succeed and to have a truly representative, responsive, and inclusive democracy. And that's really the world, I think, that the Eco Diversity Initiative pointed us toward. And that's where we need to keep heading. And so today it's important that we, of course, look back at the success of the program, but that we look forward and look forward toward the clearer view of the way that we're trying to move to protect, again, these programs and initiatives. And so I'm excited about the conversation that we're going to have today. I have a great group of not just experts in the field, but folks who have personally been touched by the ECHO program. And I'm going to turn it over in a minute to my colleague Edwith Theogene from the Race Equity and Justice team to bring up the panel. But first, I want to bring up another special guest, Mr. Kevin Bailey, who, and Kevin, I got to get your title right because it's a long and official title, right? Kevin Bailey, who is the Associate Administrator for Management in the Office of Congressional and Intergovernmental Relations at EPA. He's nodding, so I did that right. I gave you a promotion. Oh, well, that's all right. We're going to speak that into your path. But Kevin's also an ECHO alum, and so both to talk about the strength of the network and importance of the program, but also the important work going on at EPA, and then we're going to bring up Edwith at our panel. So with that, Kevin, thank you so much. Come on.
One question, is it eco or echo? Okay, I just wanted to make sure I hadn't been saying it wrong. But what a day, right? Particularly considering the original date of this event. I think that day we were very cold, very snowy, and to have this spring weather upon us, magnificent time to be here. Thank you for that introduction as well. I'm very honored to be here today on behalf of Administrator Regan, the 16th Administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency, the first Black man and second person of color to serve in that role. Not only is Administrator Regan leading the agency's efforts to tackle climate change, advance environmental justice, and to ensure all people have clean air to breathe, clean water to drink, and can lead healthy lives, he's also committed to ensuring EPA is a model employer with a focus on diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. I've always said this, regardless if it's EPA, some other federal agency, the people who are in the rooms making policy decisions that affect the American public should reflect the American public. A more diverse workforce could certainly lead to more inclusive and equitable lived experiences for many. Now, I'm not Michael Regan, and Michael Regan certainly isn't Kevin Bailey, but we have many similarities between the two of us. First, we are both native North Carolinians. Administrator Regan being from Goldsboro, North Carolina, I being from Jacksonville, North Carolina, about an hour and a half east. We both attended HBCUs. Administrator Regan went to North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University, commonly referred to as North Carolina A&T. I went to North Carolina Central University, NCCU. We both joined EPA very early in our professional careers, and we were both Environmental Career Organization associates, ECO associates. So I'm essentially his doppelganger. I mean, there's no better proxy you could have had for this event than Kevin Bailey. But in all seriousness, the reason we are here is to recognize the impact and legacy of the Environmental Careers Organization's diversity initiative and how other like programs can positively impact racial diversity and equity within the federal government, but even more specifically within the environmental field. As the planning was underway for this event, I started to come across names of people who I had worked with, former colleagues, current colleagues, and I come to find out they're former ECO associates. When the announcement for this event went out, I was contacted by a number of people. Come to find out they were ECO associates as well. And then I just thought about the reach and impact the diversity initiative had. And all of these people are doing phenomenal things, whether that work is at EPA, other federal agencies, in the private or nonprofit sectors. These folks are doing their thing, really phenomenal work. And some of these folks you will hear from today. We are in a unique period of time as far as advancing racial equity within the federal government. President Biden's and the administration's executive orders, legislation supporting a lot of that racial equity work. EPA strategic plan, equity action plan that clearly states the agency's focus in this area. But all of you know that. Like, you folks know the work that is being put forth by the agency. You know the work that is being prioritized by the administration. And many of you have spent the entirety of your careers in one way or another supporting and advancing diversity, equity working to make your workplaces more inclusive and accessible, and being the example for your peers as to why that is important, why that matters. I've certainly done it, whether serving as a leader in an affinity group at EPA, serving as the deputy within EPA's Office of Civil Rights, to supporting other agency-wide efforts to advance racial equity, to create the type of agency that I want people to work at because they feel safe and included there. They see themselves reflected in the folks that work there, and in particular, the leadership, and leadership at all levels. Why else are we here? And what's really amazing is I've done a lot of that work with folks that are sitting in this room today. I can point them out. And I'm proud of that. And I'm especially proud of the fact to come to find out that many of us have a similar story in terms of our professional starts as ECO associates. So how did I get my start as an ECO associate? Honestly, it was because a really good friend of mine who had an opportunity to serve as an ECO associate prior to me. This was at EPA's research, Triangle Park. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But he tells me about this opportunity he has, with this internship. And he's like, man, I'm getting paid too. And it's not like chump change paid, like he's getting paid pretty decently. So I'm like, bro, put me on, let's get this. And now this is 2004, so I'm working on my master's degree at Central. I'm studying Black radicalism in late 18th century, early 19th century London, some pedigree there. So like my trajectory, I'm thinking is I'm going to pursue the PhD. I'm going to write, I'm going to teach like the historian. That's who I fundamentally am. So that's my train of thought. But here comes this opportunity. But of course, it wasn't as simple as, bro, put me on. There was a process going through Central's career office, interviewing, of course, filling out applications, having conversations with folks. And eventually I was selected to work in the Office of Administrative and Resource Management, OARM. That was the administrative arm of EPA's Research Triangle Park. And for those of you that don't know about EPA's Research Triangle Park campus, at that time, it was like the model for sustainable building, green infrastructure in the country, LEED certifications and all that. And they wanted to keep it that way. So as an ECO associate, I had an opportunity to impact the continued work to ensure the sustainable management of that site. I worked on master plans for EPA's Research Triangle Park location. I worked on the environmental management systems there. I was given real opportunities to work on projects that supported the fundamental upkeep of that very important space. And I contributed in ways that I didn't go into with experience thinking that I would. Again, learning about environmental management systems, sustainable and green building, working on things that had actual impact and had results. And I was getting paid. I was given the opportunity to work with and learn from professionals who served as my mentors and wanted to see me grow and be successful. But I was given the opportunity. That's all I needed. Somebody gave me the lob, and I slam dunked it home. I wore a suit every day. At the time, I only had two, so I was mixing and matching like you wouldn't believe. But I showed up, and not just physically, but showed up mentally to do the work. And after a while, I knew what I wanted to do, and that was work for the Environmental Protection Agency, and more generally, work in a space that I could have a positive impact on the future and the environment. In short, being an ECO associate provided me the foundation to jumpstart my career, whether that was going to be at EPA or anywhere else. And because of my experience as an ECO associate, I was offered many opportunities. One in New York, Region 2 at EPA, a few here in Washington, obviously took one of those. But I had options. I was graduating college with a master's degree in European history, studying black radicalism. The trajectory wasn't to be in an environmental field, work for EPA, but because of my experience and what I was offered and the opportunity I was given as an eco-associate, it provided that foundation for me to move in the direction that I did. The investment made in the Environmental Careers Organization and its diversity initiative are paying off to this day, perhaps in ways people could not have fathomed back then. I mean, goodness, there's no other example, better example than Administrator Regan, right? Or his doppelganger, Kevin Bailey. I mean, look at me. So it's fitting that we're here today to celebrate the impact of the diversity initiative and to recognize those who were given an opportunity, who were poured into, who are now giving others opportunities, carrying the important work of environmental stewardship forward. Before I close out, I want to recognize some folks that were pivotal to my success as an eco-associate. Many of those folks, unfortunately, I'm not as much in contact with today, but I still remember those folks for being the first to give me the opportunity. Sam Pagan, who originally hired me as an eco-associate, his boss, Bill Laxton, Catherine Allgood, who was a contact for me there at RTP and kind of just showed me the ropes about working in a space like that. Ben Skaggs and James White, both who have passed away, but were phenomenal mentors and people who gave me like real opportunity. And of course, Jeff Cook, Kristie King, and all the others at the Environmental Careers Organizations who put forth the effort to make this possible for so many people. Again, that investment is paying off, and I'm happy to be one of those. So thank you. Very happy to be here today. Looking forward to the rest of the program.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Edwith Theogene, and I'm with the Racial Equity and Justice team here at the Center for American Progress. I'm going to be your moderator for a really important conversation. I'm sure it's going to be hard to follow up your remarks, Mr. Bailey. If the panelists can please come up to the stage. So everyone has already heard why we're here today, as well as some stories around the Eco-Diversity program. Today we have a panel discussion to talk about the importance of this program and have a couple of alumni share their experiences and thoughts. We also have some researchers who are here on this panel too to talk about what their look back of this program is. And we're also excited to have someone here from the administration to represent racial equity and diversity initiatives and work that's been happening. So in order to get started, I'm gonna let everyone sort of introduce themselves. They're better at it than I am. If you could just say your name, your title, and the organization that you're with, and also let us know if you're an ECO alum.
I guess I'll go first. Ladies first.
No, please.
I'm Mustafa Santiago Ali. I'm the founder of Revitalization Strategy. I'm also the executive vice president of the National Wildlife Federation, and I am an eco-associate.
Nice.
Good afternoon. Nataki Osborne-Jelks, assistant professor of environmental and health sciences at Spelman College, co-founder of the West Atlanta Watershed Alliance, and co-chair of the EPA's National Environmental Justice Advisory Council, otherwise known as NEJAC, and I am also a former eco-associate.
Good afternoon. My name is Kristie King. I'm a senior vice president of diversity, equity, inclusion at a company called Astound, Broadband, sixth largest cable company. I actually worked at ECO and for about 11 years led our diversity initiative. So very, very happy to be here.
And then, hi, I'm Andrea O'Neill. I'm the Senior Policy Advisor for Racial and Economic Justice at the White House Domestic Policy Council. Also formerly served as Administrator Carnahan Senior Advisor for Equity at the General Services Administration. I am not an ECO alum, but wish I was. And I'm a former recovering investment banker from a very long time ago. So my work mostly focuses on racial and economic justice, obviously. And before I came to government, I was deeply involved in working on racial wealth gaps and pipeline programs to industries that have not been historically diverse. So very excited to join the conversation today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the introductions. Everyone has these long, lovely titles. So let's get into the conversation and start talking about this program. So this program, the Eco-Diversity Program, started in the 90s. And Carlton, who is my colleague over at Race Forward, has always said the proof is in the pudding. And he specifically has said that in terms of the outcomes and the impact of this program. So Kristie, we're here because you were so successful in growing this trailblazing program. Can you briefly characterize what was this diversity initiative?
Sure. So first, I want to thank for this wonderful to have the opportunity to be here and to speak. Wanted to also give all types of kudos to Jeff Cook, who is the founder and president of the Environmental Careers Organization. Without him and his vision, we wouldn't be here today. The diversity initiative was a movement. It was groundbreaking. It was innovative. It was something that wasn't being done at the time, especially when we talk about that it was paid, as Kevin reminded us of, which was a very, very important and critical part to this work. When we think about the environmental field overall, right? This work was really born out of a need. There was a gap there, as has been shared, a need to bring more diverse voices, presence. When we think about the insight and the energy from that, it was really critical. Also thinking about the organizations that we impacted, obviously worked a great deal with EPA and many other federal government agencies, but also the private sector, nonprofit sector as well. So it really was far-reaching. And when we think about the culture shift that happened as a result of having these young people of color within the organization, that was impactful. We know that having more ethnically diverse team members' leadership really enhances organizations. We know that having more gender diverse team members enhances an organization. And so all of these things together really impacted the organizations overall, making them more inclusive, and really giving this sense of belonging for those who were part of the organizations. And then I'll also say that there was a piece around the students, right, and providing opportunities. Like Kevin mentioned, I loved your story, by the way. It was amazing to know that all of these opportunities existed. And many students, particularly students of color, didn't really know about them. They didn't know about the environmental field, right? I mean, back then you thought about the environment, it was like, you know, hiking and granola bars. Like that was kind of what came to mind, right? Even for me, I went to a Central State University, which is an HBCU, I went initially to major in marketing, and then my mother found out there was a scholarship available in water resources management. She's like, "You're changing your major." And I was like, "Water what?" But didn't know anything about it, right? And it led me to eco and many other opportunities. But to think about the impact that this organization and this program made for students that wouldn't have known that this was even a possibility, right? So there's, I think the work that was done through the diversity initiative was just impactful in many different ways.
Thank you. And we're definitely seeing the impact of this program as well. I feel like the environmental justice movement that we have right now and a lot of the recent wins that we have come out of a lot of the leaders from this initiative. Mustafa, you are one of the charter employees of EPA's Office of Environmental Justice. You are also an ECO alum. Can you speak to why the diversity initiative as a pipeline program was important for supporting the early goals of the environmental justice movement?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of different ways of getting at that. You think about, because I tied back to 1827, to Freedom's Journal, the first African-American newspaper, where the editors there said that for far too long others have spoken for us, we want to speak for ourselves, to summarize it. It gave an opportunity to highlight Black and brown excellence Indigenous and Asian Pacific Islander excellence, and to also make sure that we were connecting what was happening in community to the work that the Environmental Protection Agency needed to do in a greater way. Because the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act and RCRA and a number of these various acts had a baseline of protections that were going on. But when it came to our folks, there was some disproportionate impacts that still continue to happen. So the ECO program, through the excellence of these young leaders, gave an opportunity for us to not only build that bridge, but to build the capacity of the sets of generations that were going to be necessary for us to continue to work, to dismantle systems that were not working, but to also highlight the sets of actions and strategies that folks in community were bringing forward, but also the innovation and ingenuity of young people into that space. So it was a transformational moment. Carlton and I often talk about this, of how, because we were able to build, I don't want to say pipelines, because we got 2.4 million miles of that. We don't need any more pipeline. It gave us an opportunity to build bridges. And that's something that in this moment was incredibly important, because we see how folks continue to break bridges down and to build barriers up. The ECO program gave an opportunity through the work of Jeff and others to actually break down the barriers that were there. So I'll stop there, because I can talk for a little while.
I love the history lesson, though. We all need more of that, especially nowadays when people are sort of running away from history. So thank you so much for that. I love also the connection between bridge building. Nataki, I have a question for you. It seems Ecodiversity's initiative has a living legacy. This has been elaborated through Kevin's story, through Mustafa's story, and also through a lot of the remarks that Kristie has just recently made. It also includes you as well. That's part of the living legacy. Would you say that the diversity initiative contributed to a generational shift in environmental leadership that would have been difficult to achieve in the absence of the program?
Thank you for that question. I think at the time that the program started, in 1990, you also had the environmental justice movement, the modern day environmental justice movement taking root at the same time. So you had individuals from communities across the country who were not only fighting for clean air, clean water, healthy workplaces and communities, et cetera, but they were also saying and signaling that we need people, in the environmental field. We need to diversify the field. It's too white. It's not representative enough of those of us who are impacted negatively by environmental issues. And so I think it was it was more than serendipity. There was something very synergistic about, the work that ECO had been doing for, say, almost 20 years at that point, that they were then able to perfect through this diversity initiative, taking something that already works and putting an emphasis on bringing more diverse populations into the field. It was just, I think really critical to helping to usher in a shift in terms of what that environmental workforce looks like. And I think we can see it today. While, I think there's still much more that can be accomplished, we see a major shift in terms of those who are represented, in the environmental field, in federal government, but also outside of it as well. Leadership in community-based organizations, leadership at academic institutions, you name it, every sector we can look at and we can see how the seeds planted by this program have taken root. You see these examples here in the room today, examples on the screen that keep flashing as well, and countless others who were a part of this, who are now leaders, practitioners, in the environmental field. They're doing racial equity work, et cetera.
Thank you. And thanks for the reminder, too. If you all are looking at the screens, we're actually showcasing some of the alumni of the program. So please pay attention to that. Some of them are also here in this room. And thank you so much, Nataki, for walking us through all of that. I do think that a lot of the times we forget that the people closest to the problem are also the people closest to the solution. And I think the Ecodiversity Initiative definitely brings that to bear. So Andrea, so thank you so much for joining us. Obviously, this has been such a great conversation. Can you clarify how some of the discussion points connect to higher level themes on racial equity that has been supported by the Biden-Harris administration?
Yeah, as mentioned, President from day one has committed to an ambitious and achievable justice and equity agenda. That includes the signing of 2 executive orders, one of which we just celebrated the first anniversary of. Seeing some faces that were there in the room as we did the White House Convening on Equity. But want to start with some universal truths in the face of all the attacks that we've been talking about, right? Race still matters. Racism is real. Systemic injustices are still plaguing communities, which means that we also need disaggregated data, right? Those don't go away. America's big enough for everybody. America's not a zero-sum game, and we have a lot more work to do to actually achieve the promise of America. And so that's what the president has been focused on, what federal partners across the government have been furiously, not just pontificating on what equity could mean sometime in the distant future, but with the money and the momentum that we have right now through landmark legislation and the administration's Investing America agenda, how can we put the money to work? How can we analyze and assess historic inequities that have persisted, some of which are, have been codified in federal programs, things that are needed to root out intrinsic biases, and putting those things on paper in time-bound, measurable actions. I see some folks in the room, I'm not calling them by name, but people on the front lines of doing this work. And what that has meant over the past 3 years is meaningful progress. One of which, just to call out specifically, is the $2 billion to the IRA that is being deployed by EPA right now. It's the largest investment in environmental justice in EPA's history. And what that means, not just from a perspective of how we do the work and how we identify and quantify what systemic barriers are, but the people in the room matter. And I know we're going to talk a little bit about DEI later, specifically in the workforce, but this is the most diverse administration in U.S. history. And it's not just kind of performative. These are folks at top levels advising folks or making the decisions themselves. And that matters in terms of the decision-making that's happening. Part of the equity agenda is not just about the big stuff, the sweeping policies, the things that get news. It's about the things that actually shift the culture and the operations of government. So a lot of it is baked into new equity NOFOs, how the money gets out the door, how we're analyzing and evaluating if it's making an impact on the ground, longitudinal studies to ensure we've got robust data sets to look at trend lines over time, asking agencies to double down on community engagement, recognizing that meaningful and real participation in concert with government. You heard you mentioned advisory committee, right? The idea of what is considered expertise, that frontline communities are a valid form of expertise that should be in conversation with government, that all community engagement is not good engagement, right? It needs to be coordinated, it needs to be targeted, it needs to be thoughtful, it needs to be intrinsic, it needs to be holistic, it needs to be sustainable, and it needs to be of community benefit, not just government benefit. So there's, principles that are shifting. Government is glacial, so bear with us as we, try to turn a centuries-old ship here. But it's important to think about, especially at this time where we are coming up on anniversaries that are meaningful, and we're at a time litigating small d democratic values and multiracial democracy itself, right? We've got the Brown v. Board education anniversary coming up. We've got the Civil Rights Act of '64 coming up. Next year's Immigration Act of '65. So real time, we're seeing Government Act, the ecosystem around government, respond, and thank you for keeping us honest. Thank you. Hopefully you analyze all the plans too. That was really helpful exercise for us last time. If you have not gone into the plans, whitehouse.gov/equity is a great place to look at the full racial equity agenda and understand what each agency is doing, including the new commitments that agencies have made for 2024. But we cannot retreat from the conversations. We cannot retreat from the last decades of progress. We have to stand in the truth and fight against false narratives and not retreat into to fear and dissent, because these programs and the principles that created these types of programs are working, have worked. We've got, I think we can call this empirical evidence based on the room that we're in, and it matters.
Yes, and that's a good segue to my next question. I think the call for action around having data, the call for action around not shying away from talking about race or turning a blind eye to all the things that have happened, I think is really important. Nataki, you are also responding to sort of this call of action. You're putting together a report about the ecodiversity program. Can you tell us a little bit about why you're writing this report? What are the things that you're looking at and the impact that you hope this report will have?
Yes, so this retrospective report is an attempt to recall a little bit of this history from the past. So it is sort of a history lesson, but not just for history's sake, for us to understand something that has worked and something that I believe can continue to work. The efforts that were put forward through the diversity initiative continue to bear fruit today. In part because of significant federal investments in the work. And while there have been a number of programs since that time, we're not able to really track the impact in the same way that we're seeing from this initiative. There have been other, organizations that have existed or initiatives that have gone forth since the diversity initiative sunset in 2007. But we're just not seeing the type of results. We're not seeing the leadership that we see in terms of equity and racial justice. And I think what's really interesting is that this was not necessarily an outcome that folks had in mind. It was about diversifying the environmental field. But in making that sort of investment, all of the things that Kristie mentioned, when you get a more diverse, group of people, you get, different perspectives, you get different expertise at the table. These are the types of things that can grow from that. It's not just a one-sided thing. So yes, we've seen that shift in terms of a more diverse workforce, but not only that, we're seeing critical leadership around the critical issues of our time. We talk about, climate change, climate injustice, environmental injustice, the racial wealth gap. All of these things, are very connected. And that program has birthed leaders in these spaces. So part of this work is to tell this story, to help us to remember, the types of investments that were made, the types of things that paid off, and really to lift up something that could happen again. I think one of the biggest tragedies is that after a certain point, the consistency began to wane in terms of the federal investments. Whether they were, earlier attacks on DEIA and that sort of thing. Moving away from, talking about diversity or talking about, efforts to bring, more, racial and more diverse racial and ethnic groups into the space. We've seen, different, different, at different points, we've seen this story happen, before. And so with that breakdown led to that lack of inconsistency. And so part of what we're trying to lift up is, at this time, at this moment, where there is perhaps a greater focus on racial equity and justice as we've ever seen, this is now also the time to pick back up one of these, really good ideas that was successful and that can, help us to continue to press forward toward the goals that we seek.
Yes, that's a really good point. I think one of the good things about the Ecodiversity Program, too, is that it brought together federal investment, private investment, and philanthropy. So it took a lot of buy-in from a lot of different stakeholders to ensure the success of it. Mustafa, you travel frequently. You see, that's what they told me. I don't know. So you travel frequently, you see the environmental justice movement, you see the impacts of climate change and climate resiliency and the folks who are sort of responding to all of that. From your perspective, do you think a pipeline program like this is still needed?
It's critical. So yeah, I've worked in over 1,000 communities, so I've seen a whole lot over the years. This program was transformational in its moment, and it is still a transformational opportunity now. As we see, as Nataki shared, all these various impacts that are happening from floods and wildfires and extreme heat, we can go down the laundry list that we're all very familiar with. But in the words of James Baldwin, he once said that if I love you, I have to make you conscious of the things you don't see. So when it comes to our communities, even though folks are beginning to understand the larger sets of impacts that are happening, they still don't understand the double and triple sets of whammies, impacts that happen inside of our communities. And if we're not able to help to create this tapestry of sets of actions and possibilities and resources, then our communities will continue to be disproportionately impacted. We'll be continually behind on the wealth gap that exists inside of our country. When we go to places like Appalachia, when we saw those floods that happened in Kentucky, folks don't pay attention to poor white folks, or let me use politically correct language, unwealthy white folks, right? I'm just keeping it real with folks. I don't do a whole lot of sugarcoating. I tell it just like it actually is. They don't see the diesel death zones that exist in California. And when kids are out playing soccer or football, depending on where you come from, what they're breathing in, right? They hear the terms about Cancer Alley between New Orleans and Baton Rouge, but they can't even conceptualize how people are being impacted. When we talk about Black maternal health, take a look at when ladies are actually breathing in this toxic pollution, right? Or you can go to a number of different locations. You go to Manchester community in Houston, Texas. How many folks been to Houston? Raise your right hand. Help your neighbor if they don't know which one is their right hand, right? But when I ask folks how many folks have been to the Ship Channel, no hands go up. So they have no idea that people can stand on their back porches or front porches and reach out and actually touch the fencing of chemical plants, right? And we can go down the laundry list of these types of things. So when you ask me the question, in this moment, how important a program like this is, we need 1,000 of these types of programs, or this program to be exponentially grown out to reach that same level to deal with the sets of challenges that we currently have and the additional sets of challenges that are coming as the climate crisis continues to intensify, right? But we have to also be able to make sure that there are young people who are well-versed in these new sets of climate economy opportunities that we often talk about. If the administration, for the first time ever, has blessed us, they didn't bless us because it's our dollars, right? It's our tax dollars, so let's get it right. To be able to finally bring those forward, because my dear sister, when I hear you sharing all the amazing things that are going on, I am taken back to the days when we used to call it environmental equity when I first started. And the set of priorities that the Michigan Working Group and others brought forward and saying, these are the things that we need to have happen. And when you talked about the glacial movement of actions inside of government, I'm thinking, well, it took us 30 years to get what those folks said back then into place now. So if we have all these amazing young people, because I see the sign over there, and I've been to the Apollo, so I know when you have to be quiet. Some of y'all who've never been to the Apollo, you'll get that later. Just Google it. We have this moment to actually have the things in place that are going to be necessary for us to not just survive, but to thrive. Let me say that again for folks. Everybody say survive. To thrive. Because I know we're in Washington, D.C., and folks don't like to get engaged when people are talking. Try it one more time. Survive.
Survive.
To thrive.
Thrive.
I'll close with this. My grandmother says you have power unless you give it away. Having these types of programs in place gives us power. The question becomes, what do we do with that power?
What a great way. Before we transition, we are going to have like a Q&A for this. conversation. So would love for you to start thinking about a good question for you to ask. As you are thinking about that question, I have one last question for Kristie, our panelist here. Part of why we're having this conversation is because we see the success of this program, we see the impact of this program, and this program is replicable. So, Kristie, you must be so proud to hear the impact of this program. Can you share a little bit about some lessons learned from you putting together and managing this program?
Yeah, I mean, there's been so much that's been said by our panelists here, you know, and it works, right? I mean, it works. Sometimes we get caught up in creating something new and reinventing the wheel, and how can we know what the formula is, right? We know what's needed. When we talk about pipeline building, and developing relationships and partnerships, it really is the key to the work that we're trying to do. And it was so wonderful to hear you so eloquently summarize all the things that are happening. And I just completely agree with so much of that, especially the whole zero sum game. It's the narrative that we're hearing now, and all of the rhetoric, the anti-D&I rhetoric, is exhausting, sickening to me, and others. And it's for those reasons that we have to keep fighting the good fight. It's for those reasons that we have to keep getting up and doing this work and making sure that we are moving forward despite all of the external voices and noise that we're hearing. So it is, it's beautiful to see the impact that the Diversity Initiative has had, and that we can continue to do this and continue to make a difference.
Yes. So we have Diane, who's going to be moving around the audience. If you have a question, please raise your hand and she'll come to you.
As they're doing that, could I just say one quick thing?
Sure.
We have to bring Dr. Clarice Gaylord's name into this space.
Yes, we do.
Right?
Yes.
Because there would not have been a program at EPA if she had not been such a champion for young people and for this particular program. So I just wanted to make sure we honor her.
Thank you for that. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon. So I am Nigel Simon. I work for EPA, but I'm not speaking in that capacity today. Mustafa, wanted to pick up on that point about communities, because Andrea, you're right, that community engagement and equity, sometimes we're not connected. I'm on the land and emergency response side of EPA, and when we are doing cleanups or emergency response, people are saying, well, if you're the federal government, what about police reform? What about unemployment, right? To Mustafa's point, there are a lot of things that communities are faced with. And it almost seems like when we talk with communities, they want us to come with a Marshall Plan, come together. And it's very similar to what we're doing with like the housing with HUD, removing lead from pipes in housing communities, right? But I think, what are we doing in terms of the equity plans? I know EPA's, but I haven't read the other federal agencies where we're really coming together as communities and embracing it. The other thing I will tell you, this is something we have talked about for a long time. The federal government spends a lot of money on conferences, and we go to nice places, but we need to put that money in those communities, those remote communities where unemployment is high, crime is high. And if they see these conferences and they see all of these folks, it makes a difference because they're dealing with a lot. So can you speak to how we can get that Marshall Plan for these communities that Mustafa talked about?
So one thing the White House has done, and it was the reason this second executive order exists, is to flesh out the interagency coordination and the operationalizing of equity in government. So EPA, I'm sure you're very familiar with that plan. But from the White House, we convene federal agencies regularly and had visibility across all the plans to make sure, as part of, and you can, in the reports, read the types of issues that are, segmented under 8 whole of government objectives for equity. Agencies determine which types of objectives they were, based on their mission, going to tackle, and who their federal partners were going to be. Some of the best examples out of that is like the Rural Partners Network, where it's a collection of federal agencies and non-government entities, community-based organizations. And by the way, a lot of this money, especially through BIL and IRA, is in the form of technical assistance to the ground to make sure that the folks that are in the communities that understand what the community issues are able to connect to the federal money. Because we know that a lot of this money is getting to the states, and then the states have different allocating authority. So our job is to make sure that the community on the ground understands what the resources are and what those connectivity points are, both through, and we know it's a lot downstream for every community, because so it's good and bad, right? All the agencies are very excited to talk to communities, and communities are like, y'all, please coordinate ahead of time, because we're not going to answer 50,000 calls, right? 5011 calls, as my grandmother would say. I'm just kidding. But the idea that we now have holistic visibility in terms of the interconnected issues, because lead is not just lead, right? Lead is education, lead is disability, lead is the future state of America itself. And this is not just a moral imperative, right? I'm going to put my banker hat back on for a minute. I read a lot of economic reports. And one of the interesting things coming out of the Federal Reserve is 12th District. They did a study on the impact of and the cost of racial and gender inequity in our society. And in 2019, they estimated that to be $2.6 trillion. And it was going to grow to $3.1 trillion by 2029, right? So the kinds of things that we're dealing with and the interlocking wicked problems that agencies are scoping and putting not just policy but actions and dollars against is historic, is multi-year, right? The idea, the president always says, equity is a generational effort. I'm a product of parents who were computer engineers. My dad was teaching graduate level computer science without the right to vote. My parents got married a week after Dr. King was assassinated. My dad's father, my paternal grandfather, was a Tuskegee Airman, got home from the war, couldn't get the GI Bill, right? I grew up knowing that I have ancestors listed by name in the 1870 census. So what does that mean? The long arc of this, right? It's not like the distant past. This is now. This is folks on this stage. This is my great aunt who's 87 in Alabama in Tuskegee that I can call now, and her daddy was enslaved as a child. So these are problems that are, and it was a quip on the glacial, and I apologize about that, because the government moves fast when it needs to. And we have moved relatively fast for this historic moment and the kind of money that we need to both get out fast because it's an emergency, but also it needs to get out right. And so the structure by which we have done that is replicable, is scalable, and hopefully, because of the interlocking nature of it, is harder to rip out. And that is the most important thing, because this has to outlive us.
Yes.
So I used to actually do this, right? So I had led the interagency working group. So Nigel, to build upon my dear sister's answer to you, the interagency working group is one of those tools that could actually help us to holistically address what's going on in communities. We have to, one, make sure, and as I look around this room, there are some experts who are here representing other federal agencies. We got to make sure that that same level of capacity and expertise exists in all of the agencies that have responsibilities for the sets of work. Here's the other things that we can do, and some folks have heard me talk about this before. One of the other things that we have to do is make sure that our contracting, subcontracting, and the president signed an executive order on this and has been doing important work in this space, that when we are going to go out to do a conference, that we're making sure that Black and brown hotels, the various folks who handle the catering, everything that's a part of that, that they're also a part of it. Because it's not enough for me that we just move to a location that may be Black or brown and that there's somebody else who owns the entity who's getting the majority of the money, right? That's one part. Here's the other part. The other part is that for each of our agencies, and some have evolved more than others, that we make sure that if someone is saying they're working on climate justice or environmental justice or food justice or whatever the various things are, that we are actually evaluating them in the performance system, because we know how difficult it has been to get that language built into it. Because if that is a part of the drivers of what goes on, then people know they're being held accountable. So it is an opportunity. I'm not using it as a as something that, yes, I am. It is an opportunity for us to make sure that we're doing this work in a way that will move from one administration to the next administration because it is built into the system.
Can I just add just one other thing on supplier diversity, right? The industrial base itself has got a lot of new money in it and a lot of new industries and industries that we haven't even thought of that will be promulgated by the work that we're doing now in the next 50 years. So how we're investing in institutions that serve Black and brown people, how we're building out the next climate and STEM workforce. You know, the chief data scientist of the United States of America currently is a Black woman. I don't know if you all know that, but I just had to say that for the record. And what that means, and she's coming from, spatial and geography-based equity work before government, looking at the response to Hurricane Katrina and how inequitable that was, right? So when we have an opportunity to not only bake in the industries for the future, but then connect that to how we're creating new entrepreneurs, how we're growing and scaling businesses through the Small Business Administration, other kinds of loan programs, and how philanthropy is stepping in about grant programs, how we're incubating new technologies into federal buildings and into the federal supply chain as we're trying to grow these things. I remember, just a year ago, GSA's got a lot of money to create new low carbon materials in buildings that are going into mega construction projects, right? And so what does that prime contracting look like? What does the entire supply chain look like? What do the workers look like? Not just look like, but have the positional authority to act, the capital to act, to respond. Many of the systemic inequities that we're seeing are because, it's not because people are not competent or not qualified. That's another myth busting we have to do, right? But because they lack the institutional capacity to respond at the moment when those funds are available. And so what do we have to do to strengthen the ecosystem and grow the sprouts that they grow into trees later so we all can have some shade when the climate crisis hits us, right? Like that is the long game. And there are people who perhaps are, not as focused on democracy that have long games. And so we have to have institutions that are strengthened and can withstand both the headwinds and the winds of climate change.
Yes, very important. So definitely hearing that we need a long game and that we definitely need to underscore that we're thinking about equity at all levels and in all pieces in order to just move a more inclusive and supportive democracy forward. Are there any other questions from the audience? Over here. Diane's coming to you with the microphone.
I'm Lewis Tate. I pastor a church called the Village Church here in Washington, D.C., Ward 7 and Ward 8, east of the river. You know anything about Washington, D.C., that areas over there have been historically underserved. That's not even a good word. This is probably the most segregated city in America, or at least one of them, even what's called Chocolate City. But the issue, I guess the question I have, because I'm not from the government, I represent the faith community, and I hear this is the first time I'm hearing these kind of conversations, which is great, because I know they're Black farmers. I know their organizations, guy named Heber Brown, who is doing a tremendous job to try to understand and bring that kind of energy to faith communities. I'm trying to, I don't know if it's a question, a statement, or something. How do we kind of make sure that we don't leave out the faith community in these conversations, number one, particularly church or mosque or synagogues of consciousness? Because we know, particularly white evangelicalism is a different conversation for a different day. But we also know out of the church there's a lot of things that have happened in terms of people who have been involved with environmental issues. And then how do we sort of take this knowledge that you all have that's in this room and get it to the places where young people can grasp it, hear it, and maybe get excited about it? Like you said, your mother told you you going over here.
And didn't have a choice.
You
That's
have a
right.
choice because there's a scholarship over there. And not only that, but understanding the career paths that could be open to them other than shooting a basketball, hitting a golf ball, tennis ball, or whatever else, baseball.
Thank you. Who wants to take a?
I'll just note, the faith community is interwoven in some of the policies that, especially through the community engagement efforts. I want to point specifically to FEMA that has a center for interfaith, and a brother leads that too, for the record. And a lot of the emergency response work, so FEMA is currently updating its emergency assistance program to be more responsive to the racial disparities that have been found as part of that program. So the community outreach related to addressing environmental justice, especially protecting safe waterways and water infrastructure. FEMA's also partnering, there's another portfolio of work that's integrating artists as a critical piece of community infrastructure. So artists are on the ground working with EPA, working with HHS, reintegrating, reconnecting folks that may be distrusting of institutions or folks that have been left out of the policy conversations, leveraging community-based organizations and faith-based networks. Yes. Yeah. I'd love to connect with you after the panel. Yes.
I'll just speak from like an advocacy lens from CAP. I think the administration has prioritized community partnerships and relationships. With the equity action plans, you can learn every agency's sort of like goal, mission, and strategy to how they're engaging with people. There's also RFIs and like dashboards to ensure that the information is getting out there. And they're also really focused on alleviating any sort of burden. So to your point, these websites are wild sometimes. Like, you ever fill out an application for something and you're like, I have a degree, I know how to read, I think I do, like, I don't understand what's going on. Like, those things are real, because if it's difficult for you, imagine for someone else who has more barriers. So I think that through the type of partnership that this administration is prioritizing, there's an opportunity to actually reach out to those agencies and speak to the folks who are coming up and building the websites, the folks who are hosting roundtables, and let them know this is what we need to ensure that we are being served appropriately as constituents, as your base, as a country, and these are the resources that need to be invested in this. And part of this conversation here is to ensure that we want to keep these conversations going to make sure that everyone has this information. It's not supposed to just stay here in this room, right? Like, this was a very much so targeted list of people that we've invited, because you all are going to be the voice boxes of this information to your communities, to your jobs, and also try to bring these programs to your communities as well. So, Mustafa, you also have some?
Yeah, because I'm sure you want a one-stop. So I would say go to the Office of Environmental Justice, who has worked with the faith community, starting all the way back with Reverend Benjamin Chavis when he was at the United Church of Christ and Commission for Racial Justice, to the work of our dear brother up in Jamaica, Queens. Carlton has worked with him, Reverend Floyd Flake. I can go down the laundry list of ministers and faiths who have been a part of the work that's happened in the environmental justice space. So that's an opportunity. There's also the Sacred Grounds program that I hope to also run. So we'll talk afterwards, and I'll get you, along with what my sister's going to share with you, some distinct places you can go instead of having to navigate the bureaucracy, which is our democracy.
Yes, and we also will have a reception afterwards too.
Can I just add one more resource? This is outside of government, but Green the Church. If you've not heard of Green the Church, Reverend Ambrose Carroll directs that and is working on a number of initiatives across the country. It's not just looking at, how you green sort of the church operations and buildings, but how you also connect to the issues in the community.
Thank you. So we don't want to stand in between you all and the food that is out there and the good conversations. So to kind of wrap up this conversation, I'd love for each of our panelists to share one thing you'd love for folks to kind of like walk away with from this conversation. And I will start with you, Andrea.
That this is an actionable agenda with resources and information and near-term wins that can be a reality. So we'll make sure that we reduce barriers to the information and the access to the resources, but there is a historic window that we all need to be running through and then make sure the door stays open for others.
And I just say that, and I mentioned this before, that we need to understand the why behind this and ensure that we're not forgetting that amidst all the noise, because it's really easy to do that and to be distracted and to always go back to why are we still doing this? Are these still issues? Absolutely. And that we need to stay devoted and committed to, again, fighting the good fight and continuing to do this on a daily basis, even more so because of the noise. The opportunities still exist, and it's just really critical that we, understand what our guiding light is and continue to do that work every day.
Sort of building on what's been said, not only just continuing the work, I think this is the time for more intense collaboration. As was mentioned, this was an initiative that took root in large part because of a federal investment, but because of foundations, because of folks in the private sector, nonprofit sector, community-based groups, et cetera. And so now is that time for that collaboration to continue. Seize this moment, seize this time at which we are focused on issues around racial diversity and equity. And let's figure out how those different sectors can come together to recreate, to expand, and to do something even more amazing than has already been done. We need folks to continue to do the work. We need to continue to diversify the environmental workforce. And so the power is in that collaboration.
Two quick things, because I'm not good at following rules. First thing is that investing in youth of color not only makes sense, but yields positive results. And we look around this room and we see some of those, and I mean, it's much larger than that. The last thing that I'll close with is a quote from Dr. King when he said that we come to these shores in different ships, but we're all in the same boat now. If you think about the challenges that we have inside of our country, they find a way of impacting everyone, and the sets of opportunities can also make a pathway forward. So as you're going to lunch, make sure you're connecting with someone and learning about them and building that beloved family that folks have often talked about.
Thank you. Thank you so much to our panelists. Can I get a round of applause for them? So thank you so much to everyone for joining us. CAP would also like to continue to thank our partners from Race Forward for this amazing conversation. So thank you, everyone.